What are three matchups that we're most excited to see in Sunday's season opener when the Denver Broncos take on the Las Vegas Raiders? Well, you're going to get that and much more with a cup of coffee on this morning's brand new GMB. Good morning, Broncos country. Welcome into another episode of GMB. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter here. As you're watching on Mile High Sports YouTube page, do us a favor, hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on your favorite Colorado sports teams coverage here. You get GMB every single weekday, Monday through Friday, 9 o'clock a.m. Mountain Time. You're going to get Colorado Avalanche coverage with Eric Dean, Denver Nuggets coverage with Ryan Blackburn, and Colorado Rockies coverage with Drew Kreisman. Mile High Sports, every team, every day. Look, Sunday's game is approaching. Obviously, there's a lot on the line here for both teams, and we always talk about the importance of making sure you start off the season on a strong note here. But with Denver taking on the Raiders, we've talked about the weighted importance of, okay, hey, it's your first AFC game. AFC games matter. Conference games matter. It's your first divisional game. Those games matter. And ironically enough, Denver will open the season against the Raiders. They'll close the season against the Raiders. So week one's game has a lot at stake, even though that there's a massive season ahead of us. So there's going to be some matchups that happen in Sunday's first kickoff, 2:25 p.m. Mountain Time at Empire Field a Mile High. Let's get into number one here. Now, I think first and foremost, we're going to start off with the hits, right? And one thing they always tell you to do, play the hits. Everybody is looking forward to seeing Patrick Surtain versus Devonte Adams on Sunday, right? These guys have faced each other two total times in their span of Devonte Adams coming to the Las Vegas Raiders, right? And obviously in that first game last year, Patrick Surtain, you could say he got the best of Adams in that matchup. Now, some people are going to be like, oh, I'm going to go look at the box score of that game. And they're going to see that Adams had over 100 yards, but he only had 40 yards total against Surtain. Then they started moving him away from Surtain in that game there. And then you look at the overtime game, the second time that Denver played the Raiders last year when they were wearing the color rush uniforms. And obviously you had the walk-off touchdown from Devonte Adams in overtime. If you watch football, if you read the coverage, you know that necessarily wasn't Surtain giving up the touchdown. There was a miscommunication on the back end and allowed Devonte Adams to go free there. Surtain is playing zone coverage at that point. It's not like it was man-to-man, but you know what? People aren't going to look at that. And you can make valid points when you go back and watch the tape that before that play happened in overtime, yeah, there were some times where Devonte Adams did get Patrick Surtain on a couple of catches there. And look, hey, that's what you want to see here in the NFL. I think we live at a time now where everything is so villainized. And look, obviously Devonte Adams had a lot of words about Surtain after the game saying he's not ready. Here's the deal, folks. These are two of the best guys at their positions in the NFL. At the end of the day, there's a lot of mutual respect for one another here. And we saw that really kind of equate itself a little bit last year. You know, the NFLPA conducted their first ever all-pro voting as led and voted on by players. And the way that they did it is, okay, if you're a defensive back or a corner, the people that are going to vote for you are wide receivers, people that you've gone against, people who play the position that you have to cover, and vice versa. For cornerbacks, they have to talk about wide receivers. And there's a lot of respect there for Devonte Adams and Patrick Surtain. Now, while there's a lot of conversation in terms of the media and fan bases really hyping up a lot of, you know, their own side, whether it's PS2, whether it's Devonte Adams, this is must-see TV for anybody who's watching football. Now, if you love defense like me and you play defense, you're a cornerback like me, I might be a little biased on the subject because I love watching defensive back play. And I love seeing how coverage is lined, but we have not seen a corner in quite some time like Patrick Surtain with how he's able to maneuver. I mean, just his size, his athleticism, and for how he moves, his footwork, his football instincts. I mean, he does things that not many players at that position can do from a skill level standpoint. And I think that's why it makes the matchup against Devonte so intriguing here. But how are we going to maybe see this play out in Sunday's matchup? I think there's going to be times we're going to see Surtain on Devonte Adams. And certainly if the Broncos are going to find a way to eliminate maybe one of their best receiving threats, yeah, you put Surtain on that guy here. But here's what we've seen the Raiders do. And they did this in that second game. They did this a little bit in that first game too late. And it kind of worked for them a little bit. It's how do you get Devonte Adams away from an isolated one-on-one matchup with Patrick Surtain, right? Well, you know, hey, you can start him off the ball on the outside as the number one wide receiver. When he's off the ball, it means you can bring him in motion. You can motion him in to be the number 2 guy. You can motion him across the formation. You can motion him to be the number 3 guy. And really it forces a coverage to change and adjust a little bit, because there's not many times where you're going to see Devonte Adams line up on the outside, off the ball, motion to as the number 3 guy and go in, and you're going to have Surtain following him. That really compromises a lot of what the defense wants to do from the structural standpoint of it. Now, obviously, if you're in man and you're locked into it, yeah, you're going to have to adjust there. It's tough, but the Broncos, I mean, anybody at the NFL level, college level, there's going to be certain adjustments that preserve what your defense is doing as a whole versus what these man-beating concepts that you're going to see with motioning guys across the formation, because Devonte Adams, as we all know, one of the best route runners in the NFL, good size, great athleticism, very explosive when you put the ball in his hands. And the challenge that you get is if you're not getting him in a one-on-one matchup and you're getting him across the field, you're getting him to where he's crossing different route concepts with, a receiver on the other side of the field or a tight end. It puts the defense in a bind because it forces guys to pick and choose who they have to cover, who they have to account for. And you know what makes it even more difficult? The fact that they have a running back like Josh Jacobs on their roster now against Denver. He's just absolutely manhandled them in all the games that he's played. I mean, Denver has not beaten the Raiders when Josh Jacobs has been the starting running back there. Denver hasn't beat the Raiders in quite some time, and they need to do that. One of the listeners that I have on Locked On Broncos posed a very interesting question to me in the YouTube comments and was talking to me about if you had to choose one matchup, right? If you had to choose the Broncos against Josh Jacobs, or if you had to choose the Broncos against Devonte Adams, you could neutralize one of those things. Which one would you choose? It's tough because Devonte is so talented. Hunter Renfrow is very talented inside the slot. They have a new tight end, and Michael Mayer from Notre Dame. And then you have Josh Jacobs, who's very, very talented as a running back. He was the NFL's leading rusher last year. He deserves to get the big bag that he's looking for. We'll see if the Raiders decide to do that. I know they freed up around $17 million of cap space by restructuring Jimmy Garoppolo's deal. But this is where you have a very hard time as a defensive play caller is how do you neutralize their most dangerous threat, because they have other guys that can hurt you. I don't know which one I would choose personally. So Broncos country, if you're watching this, you want to answer it, make sure you go ahead and write that in down below. But I think you always have to start off with the one matchup that everybody's most excited to see, and that is PS2 versus Devonte Adams for the 3rd time. And I think there's people that are like keeping track of it like it's a scorecard. I don't think you can do that. I think you just got to respect and appreciate greatness on both sides for what these players bring to the table. You're going to see 2 top-tier players in the NFL at their positions respectively going against each other. You love to see that. That's what makes football so exciting, seeing the best of the best versus the best of the best, and you're going to get that. So for the number one matchup we're going to talk about here, PS2 versus Devonte Adams is the one that Broncos country wants to see. The number 2 matchup that I think everybody in Broncos country needs to keep their eye on here is exactly cliche enough. How do the Denver Broncos stop and mitigate the effect that maybe Josh Jacobs can have in the game? Now, obviously, when you look at how he's able to have success, and if you go back to the games that Denver has played him in specifically, there's times where they actually do a really good job on some drives. You get a couple of 3-and-outs, or you stop a drive there, but then it's usually in the late second quarter, or it's usually maybe to open up the third quarter where there's this big run by Josh Jacobs where he runs through, hits the A gap or the B gap, breaks one tackle from a linebacker or a defensive lineman, keeps his feet chugging, and when ideally he should be brought down, boom, it just demoralizes the defense, deflates them there. And he's done that, I think, in every game that I've seen him play where Denver has him wrapped up and he just runs through it. Yards after contact. He was number 1 in the NFL for a reason in that last year. Happened specifically last year in 2 of those games. And like I said, there's a reason he averages 4.7 yards per carry when taking on the Broncos. And so Denver's going to have to find a way to, can you bring him down on first contact? And look, what does the Broncos defense look like now? And look, new face, obviously Zach Allen. He's a high pressure, high motor guy. He can make a difference. I think what we saw in the preseason with Zach Allen and Jonathan Cooper on the same exact side, I like that. I like what it can do against the run. I like what it can do potentially in terms of rushing the quarterback. Then you have Randy Gregory on one side. And look, hey, the Broncos didn't have Randy Gregory in that second game against the Raiders. They lost him in the third quarter to that Raiders game, that first game of the season that they played, to the torn meniscus that eventually held him out of action for a good portion of the year. Randy, I think, was a difference maker in that first half there for the Broncos in that game specifically. So he's there. Mike Purcell is back, Big Mike, who's going to man the nose tackle position. More importantly, I think that's going to be a huge key to the game. Whoever controls the interior of the trench on the offense, defensive side of the ball is going to have a great chance to win this game. And I think Mike Purcell, his big anchor, is going to allow for guys like Josie Jewell, Alex Singleton to run through and plug. Safeties are going to have to take good angles in terms of going against the run. If it's an outside run, make sure you're taking the banana peel angle, as we always talk about in the coaching world there. But it's, hey, the first guy, don't try to just be the hero and try to just clean Josh Jacobs' clock, because that simply doesn't work. He's a big physical back. He runs hard. He runs fast. Hit him, make contact, wrap up, hold on. And you know what? It's going to take everybody else rallying to the football to bring him down. The Broncos, I can tell you this, the vibe, there's a lot of respect. The Broncos have a ton of respect for what Josh Jacobs can do. And even Alex Singleton told us earlier in the week that he knows, hey, it's going to take all 11 of us flying to the ball consistently to have a chance to stop him or to alleviate maybe what he can do that gives the Broncos the best chance to win. And hey, can they buck the trend here in Sunday's matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders? That's one question, one key to watch here. We got another matchup that we're excited to watch that we'll talk about here on today's episode of the show. Real quick, got to give a special shout out to our sponsor over there, Superbook Sports. Why bet with the big boys this football season? Well, instead, try your hand with a local book. That's Superbook Sports this fall. Superbook Sports is the book next door, just a dedicated team of the best odds makers in Las Vegas, making sure that you get the best prices and parlays anywhere. And now Superbook, they'll give you a bonus of up to $250 when you sign up and wager on the same day and use the promo code MILE-HIGH. That's mile space high at Superbook Sports. So bet with the best and use promo code MILE-HIGh this football season with Superbook Sports. Visit superbook.com for terms and conditions. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. How do the Denver Broncos mitigate the impact that Max Crosby, Chandler Jones, I'd be very curious to see if he plays this upcoming weekend, Tyree Wilson, and what the Raiders defense can do to create pressure on Russell Wilson and the Broncos offense. This is our third matchup that we're most interested in seeing because it's a little bit overarching. We don't know exactly what the Raiders defense is going to look like, but we do know that, hey, you're going to get pressure from Max Crosby. You're going to get pressure from Chandler Jones. Tyree Wilson, what's he going to look like in the NFL? Obviously very dominant at the college game, was the first-round pick for the Raiders this year. That's something you absolutely have to follow and pay attention to. But you look at linebacker, they've got Divine Diablo, who's I thought had a pretty terrific year stepping in last year for them. At the cornerback position, you still have Nate Hobbs, who's going to play inside the nickel. He's arguably one of their best players on the defensive side of the ball, not named Max Crosby. And then they added veteran Marcus Peters, who we all know played for the Ravens, played for the Rams, played for the Chiefs at one point. He just brings this veteran swagger to a secondary I think was really missing it. Very curious to see how he plays in the silver and gold and maybe what type of impact he can have, but maybe try to get some matchups on him. And then obviously you have at the safety position, you have Trevon Moehrig as well, who's, an ascending young player here. Patrick Graham's defense coordinator for the Raiders, it's predicated on we want to create as much pressure on you as possible. It's not necessarily like 6 or 7 man blitzes. It's we know that we have guys like Max Crosby, Chandler Jones. We know that we can put them out wide, crash the gaps in, shoot it from the linebacker spot. But they're also going to send a nickel blitz. When they go dime, they're going to get very creative. They'll send a guy from the slot, replace that coverage with the back end safety there. And these are some basic concepts you see around the NFL, but for Denver specifically, I just remember in these matchups, that's where Denver struggled. Max Crosby was a one-man wrecking crew against the Broncos last season, matching up against Garrett Bowles in that first matchup. Now, Denver brought in Mike McGlinchey to be the right tackle to hopefully solve that issue there. Garrett Bowles is going to be in his first game back since, first meaningful regular season game back since suffering that broken leg against the Colts last week in week 5 of the season. Obviously, he played some in the preseason, had some good reps, had some shaky moments there. So does he feel a little bit more confident coming back from that broken leg? That's, I think, one thing we're going to have our eyes on here. Obviously, Ben Powers at left guard, you brought those guys in. Communication amongst the O-line is going to have to be great here. But with the injury to Jerry Jeudy, we talked about maybe seeing a little bit more 12 and 13 personnel here for the Broncos. And so what that means to me, if I'm putting on my coach's hat, if I'm a defensive coordinator, here's how I'm going to view it. Okay, if I were an offensive coordinator, what would I try to do to mitigate the risk of Max Crosby disrupting our game plan, or Chandler Jones for that matter? I think you have to be very selective with maybe how you utilize some of your pieces on the offensive side of the ball to mitigate that. Now, obviously, there's going to be times where these guys are asked, Mike McGlinchey, Garrett Bowles, they're asked to win their one-on-ones. But for me, if I'm a good coach, I'm going to help out a little bit. Even though I trust in those guys, I'm going to put Chris Manhertz wherever Max Crosby is at times. If it's a key passing situation and I know I need to give Russell Wilson as much time as possible, I'm going to put Chris Manhertz out there, his 6'4", 6'5" body type, big basketball frame. And you know what? I'm going to help out Garrett Bowles and Mike McGlinchey. Not saying that they need the help, but you know what? It's your best course of action to mitigate the risk that is, hey, let's just let this guy wreck us in a one-on-one situation. You watch the tape on Max Crosby, you see how big he is. You see how fast he is, athletic, but you also see how physical he is as well. And Denver needs to be prepared for what he can do because he's one of those guys that can wreck your game plan. And Sean Payton, I think, recognizes that, understands that. So expect to see some Chris Manhertz this week, maybe some other tight ends to the side where Max Crosby is extra chip help. But that means that those other guys, if they're dedicating extra chip help to one side, they got to come correct on the other side. And there's got to be consistency in the volume in which these reps, where they get these one-on-ones, win your one-on-one, do your job. As cliche as it may sound, that's how football works. But it is going to be a challenge here. And a lot of the reports coming out of Las Vegas, I talked to a few beat reporters over there. I have the privilege of working with one every single year at the Locked On Network, and he was telling me, hey, there's a different vibe to the Raiders defense this year, something that the Denver Broncos have to account for. And that will wrap up our 3 matchups that we're most excited to see this upcoming weekend when the Broncos kick off their season opener against the Las Vegas Raiders in Power Field, Mile High, 2:25 p.m. Mountain Time. You can catch all the recap and all the action on next Monday's GMB, but we're going to have some more buildup as well. Broncos will have practice today. We'll get you with the biggest story on tomorrow's episode, GMB.